A teenager finds freedom on a skateboard, gliding through quiet suburban streets, unaware that a powerful HOA is watching him with disapproving eyes. What begins as a harmless escape will soon turn into the spark of a battle between personal freedom and controlling authority. The late afternoon sun dipped low across the rows of neatly trimmed lawns, casting golden streaks of light over the quiet neighborhood. Houses with identical beige siding and white fences stretched block after block, a picture of suburban perfection. To most people, it was peaceful. To 16-year-old Jordan Miller, it was suffocating. The only thing that made it bearable was the smooth hum of his skateboard wheels as they rolled against the asphalt. With each push, he felt the monotony of the neighborhood fade into the background. Skateboarding was more than a hobby. It was his escape. Jordan leaned into a turn, his black hoodie flapping slightly in the breeze, his sneakers worn from countless rides. He wasn't doing anything extreme. No tricks, no grinding rails, no shouting with friends. It was just him, the board, and the open street. But for Jordan, this quiet ride down the cul-de-sac felt like freedom. Every push of the board released the weight of school stress, family expectations, and the general unease of being a teenager in a neighborhood where everyone seemed to be watching. Unbeknownst to Jordan, eyes really were watching. From behind the carefully drawn curtains of a pristine white house, a figure adjusted their blinds to get a clearer view. Mrs. Henderson, a longtime member of the HOA board, narrowed her gaze at the teenager rolling past. To her, the skateboard was not a harmless pastime. It was noise, disturbance, and rule violation. She tapped her fingers against her coffee mug with irritation, already composing the email she'd send to the HOA president that evening. Jordan, of course, had no idea. All he felt was the wind against his face and the rhythmic glide of his wheels. He coasted past a row of houses, nodding to Mr. Lewis, the retired veteran who sat on his porch every afternoon. "Evening, kid," the old man greeted with a faint smile, tipping his cap. Jordan smiled back, relieved to know not everyone in the neighborhood frowned at him. The HOA didn't see it that way. To them, Jordan's board was a symbol of rebellion, something out of place in their carefully maintained environment. They thrived on rules, lawns no longer than 2 inches, no basketball hoops visible from the street, and certainly no loitering with skateboards on their perfectly paved roads. What Jordan saw as expression, they saw as threat. As he reached the end of the block, Jordan crouched slightly, picking up speed before kicking his board into a small hop over a crack in the pavement. Nothing flashy, just instinct. He landed smoothly and kept going, smiling at the simple joy of motion. For him, it wasn't about showing off, it was about feeling alive. In that moment, the world seemed less complicated. Back at home, his mother, Angela Miller, peeked out the window with a mix of pride and worry. She admired her son's passion, but knew how the neighborhood could be. She had heard the murmurs at the last HOA meeting. Complaints about unsupervised teens, about skateboarding creating noise. Angela brushed it off at first, assuming the board had bigger issues to worry about. After all, Jordan wasn't vandalizing anything, wasn't hurting anyone. He was just riding. Still, the concern lingered at the back of her mind. Jordan's father, on the other hand, was rarely home early enough to notice. Police Chief Daniel Miller was a man of authority, respected across the city, but his work often kept him away during afternoons. To him, Jordan was just being a kid, and as long as his grades stayed decent, he wasn't concerned. The thought of the HOA picking a fight over skateboarding hadn't even crossed his mind. Jordan, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing, skated into the small park at the edge of the neighborhood. It wasn't a skate park, just a patch of grass, a walking trail, and a few benches, but he loved weaving between the trees and feeling the crunch of fallen leaves under his wheels. He practiced balancing, shifting his weight, and tried small ollies on the edge of the sidewalk. Alone, he laughed quietly to himself when he nailed a clean landing. What he didn't know was that a phone camera was recording him from across the street. Mr. Carlson, another HOA member, stood near his driveway pretending to check his mail, but secretly filming Jordan's every move. To him, this was evidence. He muttered under his breath, "Rules are rules, kid. You can't just do whatever you want." Carlson would later forward the footage to the HOA president with a subject line that read, Skateboarding violation must address immediately. By the time Jordan rode back home, dusk had fallen. The sky turned purple and orange. Cicadas buzzed faintly, and porch lights began to flicker on. He carried his board up the steps, sweaty but content. Inside, Angela handed him a glass of water. "Good ride?" she asked. He nodded, gulping it down. To him, it had been a perfect evening. But perfection was about to unravel. That very night, HOA board members gathered in a brightly lit conference room inside the community clubhouse. Stacks of papers and laptops sat open, and Jordan's name was mentioned more than once. Henderson played the video Carlson had recorded, pausing dramatically on clips of Jordan gliding near the park. The board exchanged nods and disapproving sighs. "This is exactly the kind of behavior that disrupts our neighborhood's peace," Henderson declared. "If we don't stop it now, we'll have teens loitering on every corner." The president, a stern man named Richard Harlan, agreed. "We've set rules for a reason. This can't go unchecked. Tomorrow, we draft the first warning letter. He needs to understand this isn't just about skateboarding. It's about respect for authority." Across town, Jordan slept soundly, his skateboard propped against the wall. He had no idea that the wheels of something much larger than him were already turning. He couldn't imagine that his simple rides to the neighborhood were about to trigger a confrontation that would spiral far beyond what anyone expected. For now, though, Jordan dreamed of speed, Trixie hoped to master, and the open roads ahead. Tomorrow would bring whispers, warnings, and eventually war. But tonight, he was just a kid enjoying his escape. The sound of the skateboard's wheels echoing across the quiet street lingered even after the boy finally rolled into his driveway. He picked up the board, smiling with the satisfied exhaustion that came only after hours of gliding, kicking, and carving to the pavement. His world felt simple in those moments. Just him, his board, and the rhythm of movement. When he pushed open the front door, the warm smell of dinner drifted from the kitchen, and the laughter of his younger sister carried through the hallway. To him, it was just another day. He didn't know that his freedom had already been noted, cataloged, and discussed in hushed tones behind closed blinds. 2 days later, the disruption arrived. It wasn't in the form of a knock on the door or a confrontation on the street. It came in the mail, an ordinary white envelope with the HOA's logo printed neatly in the corner. His mother spotted it when she sorted through the pile of bills and flyers, frowning at the official seal. She slit the top open with her finger as she stood by the kitchen counter. At first, she thought it might be some kind of neighborhood update or meeting announcement. Instead, her eyes skimmed across words that made her scoff aloud. Violation notice. The heading read in bold, almost accusatory font. Below it was a short paragraph, written with the cold detachment of legal language. It has come to the attention of the Homeowners Association that your household is in violation of neighborhood rules regarding street use. Specifically, your minor child has been observed skateboarding on neighborhood roads, which poses safety risks and disrupts the peaceful environment expected by our community standards. Continued violations may result in fines or further disciplinary action. His mother let out a short laugh, shaking her head. "You've got to be kidding me," she muttered. The boy's father walked into the kitchen just then, loosening his tie after a long day. He saw the letter in her hand. "What's funny?" he asked, setting his keys on the counter. "This," she said, handing him the paper. "Apparently, our son is now some kind of criminal for, what? Riding a skateboard." The father read the notice silently, his brow furrowing deeper with every line. When he finished, he placed the paper down on the counter like it was something absurd that didn't deserve to be in their house. He looked toward the stairs, where the muffled thump of music hinted their son was in his room. They're seriously going after him for skateboarding? He's not spray painting walls or breaking windows. He's literally just riding. Their laughter at the absurdity of it filled the kitchen. But beneath that humor, a thin thread of irritation wove through. The HOA wasn't a joke. Not really. Everyone in the neighborhood knew that once the association set its sights on you, they didn't let go easily. Still, the family decided not to give it much weight. When the teen came downstairs, hair still damp from a shower and his board tucked under one arm, his parents showed him the letter. His eyes widened in disbelief. "Wait, what? They're serious? I'm just skating." That's not even against the law. They think it's against their law, his father said dryly, pointing to the HOA logo. Apparently, you're disturbing the peace. The boy laughed in disbelief. Disturbing the peace? I'm not blasting music. I'm not even loud. Half the time I skate, when no one's even outside. He leaned against the counter, shaking his head. This is ridiculous. His mother smiled, trying to calm the sting of unfairness she saw on her son's face. Don't let it get to you. We know you're not doing anything wrong. They're just exaggerating. But the boy couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. He remembered the way certain curtains had twitched when he skated past, how one of the older residents had scowled from her porch. At the time, he'd brushed it off, thinking they were just grumpy. Now it clicked. They hadn't just been annoyed neighbors. They'd been documenting him, waiting for the moment to report it. Over the next few days, the notice became a running joke in the household. His younger sister teased him by calling him the neighborhood outlaw whenever he picked up his board. His father joked about framing the letter like some kind of trophy. Yet, as much as they laughed, the reality that the HOA had officially marked them with a violation wasn't something they could ignore completely. One evening, while the family sat together in the living room, the conversation turned more serious. It's not just about this one letter, his father said, his tone shifting to one of quiet warning. If they've started with something this petty, there's a good chance they'll find other excuses too. That's how they work. They test the waters with one violation, and if you don't push back, they keep piling it on. The boy frowned. So what do we do? Do I just stop skating? That's not fair. His father leaned back in his chair, thinking, you shouldn't have to stop. You're not hurting anyone. But I also don't want you feeling like you're under a microscope every time you step outside. The room grew quiet, the weight of the situation pressing in. It wasn't about skateboarding anymore. It was about power. The HOA wasn't really concerned with safety or peace. They were flexing authority, sending a message, we control what happens here. The next morning, when the boy rolled down the driveway again, he did so with a strange mix of pride and defiance. He carved through the street with practiced ease, but he kept glancing at the windows lining the cul-de-sac. It wasn't paranoia anymore. He could almost feel the eyes on him. Later that day, his father checked the mailbox again. No new letters, just bills. But as he closed the metal door, he caught sight of a figure across the street, one of the HOA committee members, a man in his 50s, standing at the end of his driveway with folded arms. Their eyes met briefly before the man turned and walked away without a word. The father sighed. He knew this wasn't the end. The second warning letter had barely been set aside when another white envelope showed up in the family's mailbox. This time, it wasn't just a warning. It carried the unmistakable red ink stamp across the top that read, Notice of Fine. The mother held it in her hands, her brows furrowing as she read it aloud at the kitchen table. $150, she said, her voice tight with disbelief. For what? Noise disturbance? Damage to property? What damage? The teen sat across from her, spooning cereal into his mouth, though his appetite had already dwindled. He glanced at the letter and shrugged. They're saying my wheels are leaving marks on the sidewalk. That's ridiculous. It's concrete. Everyone walks on it, bikes on it. Nobody says a word about that. His tone was defiant, but beneath it was a thin thread of unease. His father picked up the letter, his jaw clenching as he scanned it. Noise disturbance? Our neighborhood has barking dogs at all hours, kids screaming in pools, cars with loud stereos driving past. But they're writing up my son for skateboarding. He shook his head. This is harassment. At first, the family brushed it off. They joked about how absurd it was that rolling wheels could be considered a threat to peace. They even laughed at the thought of the HOA treating their son as if he were some kind of criminal vandal. But that laughter began to fade when, just a week later, another envelope arrived. This time the fine was $250. The letter claimed continued violations and added a stern warning. Failure to pay could result in liens placed against their property. The mother's face drained of color as she read it. They're threatening our home over skateboarding, she whispered. The teen lowered his eyes. What once had been a source of freedom and joy The skateboard beneath his feet, the rush of the wind on his face, was now turning into a burden. Every time he stepped onto it, he could feel invisible eyes watching him, judging, waiting to pounce. Neighbors who once waved politely now glanced away quickly, whispering behind closed doors. A few even stared openly as he passed, shaking their heads disapprovingly. The boy's frustration mounted. Why are they treating me like this? I'm not hurting anyone. I'm not breaking anything. They're making it sound like I'm some kind of menace. He slammed his hand on the kitchen counter, his voice cracking. His parents tried to calm him, but they, too, were beginning to feel the squeeze. Bills had always been carefully managed in their household. Now, with the HOA fine stacking up, tension began to creep into dinner conversations. Arguments started over whether the teen should just stop skateboarding altogether. His mother, worried about the financial pressure, pleaded, "Maybe you should just take a break until this all blows over." But his father shook his head firmly. "No, if we give in now, they'll know they can control us. That's not how this works." The boy felt caught in the middle. Skateboarding was his outlet, his identity, his freedom. To give it up would be like surrendering a piece of himself. But to continue meant dragging his family into deeper conflict with an HOA that clearly wasn't backing down. Soon, the fines grew steeper. Another letter arrived, $400. The language grew sharper, the threats bolder. Failure to comply will result in legal action. That phrase haunted them. His mother paced the living room late into the night, running numbers in her head, trying to calculate how they could possibly keep paying if this continued. Word spread quickly around the neighborhood. Some parents pulled their children away when he rolled by, as if his skateboard carried danger. Others whispered about how the family at the corner house was in trouble with the HOA. The once friendly faces of neighbors now felt like a jury waiting for a conviction. The teen felt the weight of it all pressing down. Even his once carefree rides down the street now felt dangerous, not because of any physical threat, but because every turn of his wheels seemed to add another dollar sign to fines. He started sneaking out later in the evenings, trying to skate when fewer people were around. But even then, porch lights flicked on and curtains shifted as neighbors peeked out. One evening, he came home breathless and angry. "They followed me," he said, dropping his skateboard at the door. His mother's eyes widened. "Who followed you?" He explained that a couple of HOA board members had walked behind him as he skated, arms crossed, their glares heavy. They hadn't said anything, but their presence alone was suffocating. The father's anger reached a boiling point. He wrote a long letter back to the HOA, demanding explanations for the fines, questioning their fairness, and challenging their authority to punish his son for harmless activity. The reply he received was curt and unapologetic. "The rules are in place for the good of the community. Continued violations will not be tolerated." The teen read the letter and felt a pang of guilt. "This is all my fault," he muttered. His father put a hand on his shoulder. "No, son, this isn't your fault. This is about power. They think they can push us around. But we're not going to let that happen." Still, the family couldn't ignore the practical side. Money was tight. Every fine chipped away at their stability. The mother quietly began skipping little luxuries at the grocery store, cutting corners, stretching meals. She didn't complain, but her son noticed. It gnawed at him, filling him with resentment toward the HOA and toward himself for being the reason. The once happy home grew quieter. The laughter at dinner faded, replaced with silence and tension. Even the teen's little sister picked up on it, asking one night, "Why is everyone so mad?" No one had an answer that would make sense to her. As the weeks dragged on, the stack of letters grew. Each one, neatly folded, sat in a drawer his father kept in the study. The drawer became a symbol of their mounting frustration, a pile of paper representing the chokehold of an HOA determined to win. And yet, beneath the weight of fear and frustration, a spark of defiance remained. The teen refused to give up his skateboard completely. Some nights, after everyone had gone to bed, he would quietly slip out, rolling down the dark, empty streets, the sound of wheels on pavement echoing like a declaration, "I won't be broken." But the HOA was relentless, and the financial pressure was becoming unbearable. What had started as a laughable warning had now turned into a war of attrition, with his family caught in the crossfire. The tension that had been building over the past few weeks finally spilled out onto the street one warm Saturday afternoon. The teen had grabbed a skateboard and rolled out the front door, eager for a bit of freedom. The sun was high. Kids were riding bikes. Sprinklers hissed across neatly trimmed lawns, and the neighborhood carried that calm suburban hum that made it feel safe. For him, the familiar clack of wheels against pavement was a comfort, a rhythm that helped him escape the pressure of the constant warnings, the whispered conversations of neighbors, and the shadow of the HOA fines. What he didn't expect was that today, his simple ride would turn into a scene everyone in the community would remember. He was mid-ride, weaving down the gentle slope of the street, when two HOA board members stepped directly into his path. He stopped abruptly, the skateboard rolling to his side, and looked up at them. One of them, an older man with graying hair and a clipboard tucked under his arm, raised his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "This is to stop. You are violating the rules of this neighborhood. It will no longer be tolerated." His tone carried more authority than kindness, as if the teenager had just committed a serious crime rather than enjoyed a harmless pastime. The teen froze, not from guilt, but from shock. His hands curled into fists at his sides, his face flushed red. Before he could respond, the other board member, a woman with sunglasses perched firmly on her face, added, "You've been warned multiple times. Letters, fines, none of it seems to matter. You're disturbing the peace, damaging property, and setting a bad example." Her words cut sharply, designed to echo through the quiet street, and they did. Slowly, neighbors began emerging from their homes. First, a few curious faces peeking through blinds. Then front doors creaked open, and within minutes, small clusters of people stood along the sidewalks. Some crossed their arms, watching silently. Others whispered, exchanging glances that betrayed discomfort. A few, though, looked visibly sympathetic, shaking their heads at the HOA's aggressive approach. The teenager's parents weren't outside yet, leaving him exposed. He felt every eye on him. He bent down to pick up his skateboard, wanting desperately to roll away, but the HOA members moved closer, closing off his escape. "You need to understand," the man continued, "this community has rules, and when rules are broken, there are consequences. You've already cost your family in fines. Keep this up, and things will only get worse." The teen's jaw clenched. He wasn't a rule breaker. He wasn't out here vandalizing or causing fights. He was skateboarding, something that felt as natural to him as breathing. His voice finally broke through, shaky but strong. "I'm not hurting anyone. I'm not damaging anything. I'm just riding. Why are you treating me like I'm some kind of criminal?" His words echoed, but instead of answering, the HOA members exchanged glances, their lips pressed thin. A few neighbors murmured. One older woman spoke up from her lawn chair. "He's just a kid. Let him skate." But her voice was quickly drowned by another man muttering, "Rules are rules." That single line seemed to hang in the air, slicing the crowd into those who sympathized and those who sided with the board. The humiliation hit the teen like a punch. His face burned hotter, his heart thumped painfully in his chest, and the weight of judgment pressed down on him. The skateboard at his side felt heavier than usual, and for the first time, it didn't feel like freedom. It felt like evidence being held against him. As the confrontation dragged on, his mother finally stepped outside, alerted by the noise. She took one look at the circle forming around her son and stormed down the driveway. "What is going on here?" she demanded, her voice sharp and protective. Her son's shoulders loosened a little, relief flickering across his face. But the HOA members didn't falter. The man with the clipboard replied coolly, "Your son has been warned repeatedly. The HOA has issued letters, fines, and still he continues. This is a blatant disregard for community rules." His mother's eyes narrowed. She stepped between her son and the HOA members, her arms folded across her chest. "He's skateboarding on a public street. That's hardly the same as vandalism or crime. Do you really think intimidating a teenager in front of the entire neighborhood is the way to handle this?" Her words rang clear, challenging them in a way her son couldn't. The crowd seemed to shift again. A few neighbors nodded subtly in agreement. Others avoided eye contact, unwilling to take sides. The HOA members bristled, but instead of backing down, the woman in sunglasses doubled down. If you won't take this seriously, then the consequences will escalate. The HOA has authority, and we will use it. The teen's father hadn't yet come outside, and his absence weighed heavily on him. He thought about all the warnings and arguments at home. He remembered the sighs over fines, the tension that crept into family conversations about money. He had hoped skateboarding would relieve stress, not add to it. And now, standing in the middle of his neighborhood with dozens of eyes on him, he felt like he had dragged everyone into his mess. But what cut deepest wasn't embarrassment. It was a sense of injustice. He wasn't doing anything wrong. Not really. Yet here he was being shamed, painted as a nuisance, while the rules that supposedly protected the community were being wielded as weapons against him. The confrontation finally fizzled when his father appeared at the doorway, his presence commanding instant silence. He didn't say much, only walked over to his wife and son, placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, and gave the HOA members a long, hard look. The board members stiffened, but didn't push further. With a curt, "We'll be following up," they turned and walked away, their departure leaving a heavy silence behind. The neighbors slowly dispersed, conversations buzzing in their wake. Some looked apologetic, others smug, but the damage was done. The teen's sense of belonging had been shaken, his love for skateboarding now tangled with humiliation. That night, he sat quietly at the dinner table while his parents discussed the incident in low, tense voices. The word lawsuit came up more than once, as did retaliation and harassment. His father's jaw was tight, his mother's eyes flashed with anger, and he couldn't shake the image of himself standing alone in the street, surrounded and judged. He went to bed with his skateboard propped against the wall, staring at it with a mix of longing and resentment. What used to feel like freedom now carried the weight of conflict, and though his parents had defended him, he couldn't help but wonder if things would only get worse from here. The evening air in the neighborhood carried a strange heaviness after the public confrontation. For the teen, the humiliation still burned in his chest. Every time he replayed the scene, the stares, the whispers, the smirks of those HOA members, his stomach knotted tighter. What once felt like a harmless joyride now felt like a criminal act under a spotlight. He sat on his bed with the skateboard at his side, staring at the familiar scratches along its deck. Each mark a memory of laughter, speed, and freedom. But now, instead of pride, those marks only reminded him of a freedom that seemed to be slipping away. The following morning, the family gathered around the breakfast table. The mood was subdued. His mom stirred her coffee without tasting it, her brows knit with worry. His dad flipped to the morning mail, lips pressed into a thin line. The teen, barely awake, poked at his cereal. It was the sound of an envelope being torn open that cut through the silence. His dad unfolded a letter, scanned it, and his face hardened. Without a word, he slid across the table toward his wife. She picked it up and read aloud, her voice trembling with disbelief. Final notice. It began in bold letters at the top. The HOA was threatening legal action if the repeated violations did not cease immediately. The violations listed: skateboarding within community grounds, creating excessive noise and property damage caused by wheels. The fines already accumulated were now joined with a direct threat. If unpaid, the matter would be escalated to court. The words hit the table like a bomb. His mother gasped, setting the paper down as though it burned her fingers. His father leaned back, jaw tightening, eyes fixed on the far wall. The teen stared at the letter, unable to blink. Legal action? Court? For skateboarding? It was absurd, but the weight of the words pressed on his chest all the same. The board at his side, once a shield against stress, now felt like a loaded gun he hadn't realized he was holding. That day at school, he could hardly focus. The usual chatter of the halls, the laughter of his friends, and the scrape of shoes on the tile all blurred into background noise. He heard whispers in his own head instead. Phrases from the letter, words like final notice, escalated, and court. He imagined neighbors talking behind closed doors, accusing him of things he hadn't done, calling him reckless, careless, a troublemaker. By the time the final bell rang, his spirit felt heavier than his backpack. When he came home, his dad was pacing the living room, His mom was at the dining table with bills spread out, her calculator clicking furiously. The teen dropped his bag by the door and tried to slip upstairs unnoticed, but his father stopped him. "Sit down," he said firmly. The tone left no room for argument. The teen obeyed, sliding into a chair at the table. His dad sat across from him, eyes sharp but weary. "You know we supported you, son," he began slowly. "But this has gone too far. These fines aren't just warnings anymore. They're real money, and now they're threatening legal action. Do you understand how serious this is?" The teen nodded mutely, eyes on his lap. He wanted to shout, to argue that it wasn't his fault, that he wasn't the one making this into a war. But his throat tightened and the words stuck. Instead, he just sat there, shoulders heavy, the weight of blame pressing down though he hadn't earned it. His mom spoke next, softer but no less strained. "We can't keep paying fines we don't even owe. This is ridiculous, yes, but they're holding the power right now. And I don't want you being targeted even more." She reached across the table, placing her hand over his. "Maybe it's best if you take a break. Just for now." The words felt like a knife. A break? From the only thing that made him feel alive, free in himself? He jerked his hand back, shaking his head. "You don't get it," he whispered. His parents exchanged a look, one of helplessness and concern. But the decision, though not spoken aloud, hung heavy in the room. The skateboard would have to be put away. Later that night, he sat alone in the garage, his board resting across his lap. He traced the grooves in the wheels with his fingers, remembering the first time he landed a trick, the sound of his friends cheering, the feeling of wind rushing past as he sped down the street. All those memories now felt poisoned. He leaned back against the wall, staring into the dim light, and wondered how something so simple could turn into a war. The sound of laughter outside snapped him out his thoughts. Peering through the cracked garage door, he saw some neighborhood kids riding their bikes, their parents chatting nearby without a care. No one stopped them, no one fined them, no one threatened them with court. Yet here he was, treated like a criminal for rolling on four wheels. A wave of injustice surged through him, but it quickly sank beneath exhaustion. Fighting felt pointless. That weekend, the HOA made sure their stance was felt. A notice was pinned to the family's front door for all to see. Final warning: non-compliance will result in legal action. The words in block letters might as well have been a scarlet letter. Neighbors passed by, some casting sympathetic glances, others whispering, a few smirking with satisfaction. The teen stayed inside, blinds drawn, unable to face the world that had so easily turned against him. In the days that followed, his skateboard sat untouched in the corner of his room. Dust began to settle on its surface, a cruel reflection of his crushed spirit. He avoided the garage, avoided the streets, avoided anything that reminded him of the freedom he once knew. His parents tried to comfort him, but their voices felt distant. Even his friends noticed a change, asking why he wasn't skating anymore. He shrugged them off, unwilling to explain the weight that kept him grounded. One night, as he sat staring at the ceiling, the board leaned against the wall, he whispered to himself, "Maybe they win." The words felt like surrender, but in his heart, he couldn't shake the truth. Something had broken inside him, and though he didn't know it yet, that breaking point would set the stage for what came next.